Ja. Hello, look at that, broadcasting live from my bedroom in Berlin. You can even see the corner of my bed to my left. And the Go East team did not come over and paint my wall this yellow. It was there beforehand, but I feel like I'm very much on brand today for our discussion called Blurred Lines, talking about ethics in both documentary and fiction filmmaking today. Before I introduce our esteemed panelists and we get into the discussion, I'd like to pass over the word first to the festival director of Go East, Helene Gerritsen, to share her thoughts about why we are meeting today to discuss this subject. So Helene, first of all, I hand it over to you.
Thanks, Bridget. Hi, everyone. My name is Helene. Welcome in our little underground studio here in Wiesbaden. Yes, I would very much like to talk about the ethical approach of working with protagonists and non-professional actors. But actually my keynote is called Why I Don't Want to Talk About DAO. Yes, the inspiration for this panel comes from a film project, which I did not want to program for the Go East Film Festival. And thus it shouldn't be at the center of this discussion panel. That wouldn't be fair. The film project I'm referring to is DAO by Russian director Ilya Khrzhanovskiy. 14 films were created from approximately 700 hours of 35mm footage shot between 2008 and 2011, mostly in Ukraine. Before we start talking here about the blurred lines of ethics with today's panelists, I would like to say a few words just to explain why I didn't program the DAO films here at Go East and why I don't think this project belongs in this discussion. But it did indeed make me realize how important ethical questions are in the filmmaking process. For that, I would actually like to talk about meat first. A few newspaper articles were published in Germany in the past week about Romanian migrant workers employed in German meat factories. 600 of these workers got infected with the coronavirus. In the articles, among them in Der Spiegel, their working conditions were described. Their long hours, their substandard wages. The workers live in cheap dorms and share rooms. The factory owners defended themselves, claiming that the Romanians chose to work in Romania voluntarily and all official health and safety rules had been followed. But as one director of a poultry factory said in an interview, the Romanians like to have a party and in their dorms they hang out together all the time. The German factory owner neglects to mention that he brought these Romanian workers to Germany to do jobs Germans won't touch, for low wages and in substandard conditions. As a thank you, they get blamed for their own corona infections. Now, I trust the sources behind these articles, even though there were no court cases against the meat producers, but their justification in the articles I read, to me, are not satisfactory. So as a logical next step, until I have further information about this, I won't touch the meat coming from those factories. It's very simple, really. And the same with DAO. Until production circumstances of DAO are cleared up and questions have been answered, I don't want to touch this project. For those of you who don't know what DAO is, it all started out around 2005 as a regular biopic that was supposed to depict the life of Soviet physicist Lev Landau and especially focus on his sexual escapades and run-ins with the Soviet regime. The production got well-respected French and German art house co-productions on board and financing from the CNC, Medienbord Berlin-Brandenburg, as well as the Russian Ministry of Culture. However, at some point, the director cast the script aside, his Russian producer left the project, and there was no film. But there was a film set. And precisely this film set became the stuff of legends. Built in eastern Ukraine in the city of Kharkov, around 200 people lived and worked on that set almost permanently between 2009 and 2011. The set should function like the secret Moscow research facility that the physicist Landau once worked in. Everyone wore period costumes and had to obey a strict Soviet-style regime. Around 250,000 non-professional actors and extras were cast, according to the director. And like in a reality show, the participants, almost all of them non-professional actors, had agreed that they could be filmed at any moment. There was no script. Moscow elitists coming to eastern Ukraine to set up shop with partly Western money and casting 250,000 extras. Much like the meat story, I think that has a colonial smell to it. A few articles were published over the years, but the DAO project was mostly shrouded in secrecy. However, many of you might have heard rumors and accusations surrounding the project. A real discussion about DAO only started this year after the premiere of 2 of its films at Berlinale. Some of the accusations are: in the film DAO Natasha, the director staged a torture scene with non-professional actors in which sexual assault took place, for which the actress, who is naked in the scene, was not prepared. The production used children with Down syndrome and real babies from a local orphanage for a scene about experiments in the institute. A neo-Nazi, who was part of the cast, slaughtered a live pig in front of extras that had not been informed about this. The director intimidated female extras and crew members during casting interviews. Several scenes were filmed with non-professional actors and actresses while they were drunk. These are all serious accusations that have been denied by both the director and the producers. In interviews, they state that the cast all gave their consent, that all permits were given, and that the goal of the project justified the means. The goal of the project, according to the director, was to expose the mechanisms of the repressive Soviet regime and the way it still influences people today. In order to achieve that, Khrzhanovskiy chose to recreate the historical circumstances under a repressive regime. On the project website, it says, rooted in the top secret autonomous research facilities built for Soviet scientists by Moscow, the DAO Institute became an artistic and psychological playground on a massive scale. Khrzhanovskiy hired former KGB officers to play themselves. Strict rules were in place, and people indeed started writing denunciations against each other when someone broke the rules. But if we want to examine and work through the traumas of the past, is it a good idea to repeat those patterns and inflict trauma on others? That, in essence, is the method Khrzhanovskiy was using. What's confusing to me is that he, in some interviews, claims that the project was a normal film, while in others he claims everything we see is authentic, including the torture. In the end, it doesn't really matter whether the hybrid DAO project was a normal fiction film with a script and professional actors or a documentary. I think Khrzhanovskiy's method to confront the traumas of post-Soviet societies on an artistic and psychological playground is deeply flawed. And that would have become clear from the beginning if he would, for example, have consulted with responsible producers or indeed a psychologist. I have to say, I think the topic of DAO has a lot of social relevance. That's really not the issue here. But I've seen also plenty of Russian documentaries which expose the mechanisms of Soviet repression. Those films usually do not have a blockbuster budget. The documentaries of Alina Rudnitskaya or Sergei Dvortsevoy come to mind here. So DAO is a project about which I have a lot of ethical questions. Then why don't I want to discuss it here on the panel? Apart from the fact that we are not providing the opportunity to watch the films at Go East, I have a few other reasons as well. There's never been a thorough investigation into DAO, and we don't have enough facts. The discussion is now very much about consent and about the fact if the production abided by the laws and had permission from the authorities. The shoot happened a long time ago in Ukraine before Maidan and the revolution. The project did, I'm sure, obtain permits, but how did they obtain them? And what do the current authorities in Kharkiv have to say about the matter? The State Prosecution's Office is currently investigating how the production obtained permits for the use of orphans on set, for example, 9 years after the shoot finished. It was difficult to start the investigation sooner because no one had seen the films and the participants had all signed non-disclosure agreements. That's not uncommon for a production on this scale. It is a method to avoid spoilers, and the production behind DAO confirmed that these NDAs were only used to avoid that the many participants of the project would talk about the film's story. But in this case, it also meant that participants couldn't speak about the set or the living conditions. There was no script for DAO. The set and the people on it were the script. So if a film doesn't come out for 9 years, that means 9 years of silence. Again, I think the accusations are serious enough to start an investigation. And apart from the mentioned court case in Ukraine, a group of Russian journalists has indeed taken the initiative to investigate further. So let's see what comes out of that. One aspect I would actually like to talk about at some point, the project's European producers with their somewhat colonial mindset have, in my opinion, totally enabled this production. The director traveled from festival to festival and played the wild Russian crazy genius. Commissioning editors, funders, and producers loved that image and gladly drank vodka with him. What fits the narrative is that a London-based Russian small-time oligarch coming on board for the financing at some point was not seen as a warning sign, but instead laughed away. Berlinale director Carlo Chatrian, who included 2 of the DAO films in his festival, commented on this. We don't know where the money for DAO came from, and it's probably better not to ask. In my opinion, this is an astonishing display of double standards. As long as boundaries are being crossed by Eastern wildlings who fit our cliché image of Russia, the Western refined intellectual is fine with it. Khrzhanovskiy chose to cross ethical boundaries on purpose. So in a panel about blurred lines, there's really nothing to discuss here. For some people, the cult of the genius artist is clearly not dead. A lot of mostly older Russian critics defend the project thus. The artistic merit justifies whatever happened on set. I don't want to discuss this. I find the question if an artist is above the law uninteresting and archaic. Just because someone is a genius, he or she should be beyond good or even. Please, not even Nietzsche lived by those principles. Last but not least, I didn't want to get involved in the discussion that's already going on, mostly in Russian language media. So far, the discussion about DAO is led mostly by film critics, people who, for the most part, have never experienced how protagonists open up in front of the camera and often say and do things they normally wouldn't. Most film critics have never in their life experienced the enormous responsibility for film production. When you have more than 150 people, cast and crew, and they all follow your lead and ideas, that's powerful and it's a heavy weight to carry. Ethics in that situation and under stress become a whole different story. Most of the participants in the DAO discussion, however, don't want to hear anything about the working conditions, but instead focus only on what's on screen and then ask moral questions. And here there are 2 camps, the old-fashioned and often Christian moralists who think the project is pornographic, violent, and harmful to our children. In Russia, the Ministry of Culture refused to issue a screening permit stating the film promoted pornography. And then there are the old school intellectuals who, much like our Western boomers and 68 generation, state that all criticism of the project equals censorship. If someone references the hashtag #MeToo movement, this group calls them prude or tells them they succumbed to the dictatorship of Western political correctness. A group of feminist film critics that published a public letter to Berlinale director Carlo Chatrian objecting against Dow was even accused of writing a donos, in Russian, a denunciation. The word reminds one of the show trials used to discredit dissidents in the Soviet Union. And so it happens that critics of the film who question the treatment of cast and crew are also called out for censorship. In a way, this discussion, which unfortunately has developed into a mud-throwing shitfest between film critics and moralists, makes it almost impossible to talk about the ethics of working with non-professional actors. So, that was a very long keynote, but this is why I would really like to suggest to leave Dow out of today's discussion and concentrate on the questions that should have been asked during the production process instead. Because one thing is clear, filmmakers have a responsibility for their protagonists. So I'm now very much looking forward to hearing from our panelists, who are all involved also in hybrid film formats as directors, producers, and programmers. What questions will they ask? How do they approach their protagonists? I'm very curious to find out. Thank you.
Oh, I have to turn my microphone on, excuse me. Thank you so much, Helene, for introducing this subject to us. I think that it's actually great to have kind of a cross-section of professions represented in this panel. Hi, Peter, welcome also. So for those of you who don't know me in the audience, my name is Bridget O'Shea. I work for a festival in Germany called Doc Leipzig and also the newly established Documentary Association of Europe, of which Go East kindly was one of the first organizations to purchase membership for. These questions of how to work in collaboration and in collaboration freed from the constraints of exploitation or as far away from exploitation as possible is something that I think about really almost probably on a daily basis. In the context of Doc Leipzig, that's as the bridge between East and Western Europe as it has traditionally been, and now also as a bridge between the global North and South. I also organize a co-production market there where these kind of questions emerge really, really frequently. And then in the context of the Documentary Association of Europe, thinking more about lobbying in general. So this is something that's constantly on my mind, as is the diminished role that public broadcasting and public funding is starting to play both in Europe and abroad with the emergence of new media players who perhaps don't also have the same kind of ethical frameworks to work within as a public funder does. Not saying that public funders or public organizations always get it right either. So this brings us all together today. I just also want to let you know, if you're watching in the audience, you're most welcome to ask questions. It's easier and better for me if you put it in the Q&A box in German. That's the F&A box, depending on which language you're watching us with. I have it open next to me the whole time. We'd like this discussion to be interactive, so you should feel free really to share your opinions with me in that box. In the best case in English, because I only speak also German. But otherwise, to get things started, actually, Ivana, I think I would like to start with you, if you don't mind. You have a film in the festival this year, Ivana the Terrible, and you were both an actress and the director of that film. And the main cast is not just your close family, but also, let's say, the city where you grew up or the town that you grew up in also is a protagonist in itself. Could you talk to us a little bit about how you came to make the decision to work so closely with your family? And also if you had ethical questions about it, if they had questions about feeling like they might be exploited in this process?
Yes, I exploited them as much as I could. Actually, it's it's an idea that I got since 2013 when I started working with Adrian Schiop. He's a writer that wrote the book Soldier's Story from Ferentari. This is how my first fiction film is called. I adapted this book, and I had Adi playing himself in the main role, and also I casted half of the neighborhood where he lived and that he described in his book. So I already worked a lot with non-professionals, not necessarily that I wanted it from the beginning, but I wanted to cast actors. But since the story was involving a homosexual relationship and also Roma community, a lot of actors didn't want to be casted in my film. So I started casting non-professionals, and eventually I have chosen the writer of the book acting in my film. So in this film, in Ivana the Terrible, yes, because the whole drama happened after the film Soldiers, I was in kind of crisis, medical crisis. I decided to write the script. I decided actually not to write the script. I decided to to find out what happened to me and why I was feeling so horrible. So I wrote a script, and I realized that it has a lot to do with what I went through since moving to Romania, what happened to me, how I changed. And I went back to my hometown, and I actually asked my parents if they would like to do this script with me. But I can tell you that it's been like, okay, I wrote it in 2018 in January, maybe in a week. I wrote the whole script, and then I told them, and we talked and rehearsed for 4 months. And then most of the talks we did during the shooting afterwards were, yes, no, I mean, I don't have the feeling that I exploited them, because we talked so much about it. And I think that they understood why that was so important for me, and why it is so important to go through this whole process of re-putting the drama that happened in reality in the fiction script. But I think that for them, it was kind of showing their love for me. I don't know how to explain it better than that. So I don't really have so much with them that I exploited anybody, because we talked a lot about it.
Yeah, and when it came to the premiere, were they surprised by what they saw, or? Sorry? When it came to finally premiere the film, when it was finished, was your family surprised at what they saw, or were they? Was there no surprise, and it was what they expected, or?
Well, they read the whole script, and we rehearsed script for 4 months, and the script was very much in the film like it was in the script. It was like a dot and a comma, like it was in the script, so that they didn't have a lot of it to be surprised. I mean, they knew it by heart, you know.
And you didn't have to go altogether to a therapy or need like a psychological.
They refuse therapy. They don't think that's something that it's worth of doing. No, but they saw the film in the Sarajevo Film Festival. We were together, and I think that maybe a little bit they were a little bit sad, because they saw some moments that happened in reality, and they remembered some of the stuff that happened, so they were not so happy about it. But then my father got on the street, and I remember some Italian girls were stopping him on the street, and they told him like, "Oh my God, you're magnifico." So now my father keeps repeating that he's magnifico, he's the best actor. So I guess he was okay, he's happy about it.
And could you imagine shooting the same thing with, or maybe not this exact script, but with non-professional actors maybe who are not so close to you? Would you treat them the same way, or would you put other practices into play?
Well, of course, that with my parents, I sometimes use a different language, because we're very close to each other, and sometimes maybe we talk much more alive, not to say yell at each other. Of course, I have spoken a little bit differently with other protagonists. I mean, but it was the same rehearsals were taking place of. So we would sit down, they would learn lines, and then we would practice them. So the method was pretty much the same, but the language was definitely not the same like it was with my parents.
I mean, I remember reading this like when I was in high school, that the worst behavior occurs in the family unit, like things that you would never be proud of to do outside of the closed space of the family. So I can't imagine that that your language would be the same outside of the family unit. I know in my case it would be impossible.
Sometimes, unfortunately, yeah. But with I mean, it's something that you even with your family, I have to work better with that. I need to be more careful what I'm talking. So
great. So Eric, I want to ask you. So for those, or introduce yourself for the audience. But Eric is a German producer, and he can tell you a little bit more about his company and what kind of films he produces, perhaps.
Yes. Yeah, I'm a producer from Cologne in Germany. We have the company is called coercion. We have 2 offices in Cologne and in Stuttgart in the south of Germany. And what we're basically doing is producing creative documentaries for cinema distribution and worldwide distribution. And we do many films in German-only financing situations, but at the same time, I think nearly half of our projects are now also international co-productions from different sides. Maybe that we are majority producers or joining as minority producers on a later stage. Different kind of situations that we're producing in. And mainly we are looking for for talent, really. We kind of do this, we really love author-driven documentaries. We really love personal handwriting and personal styles. And that's what we're looking for, really.
So many of the films, I mean, first of all, you work with a really broad spectrum of talent, as you said, some more local, some more international, but it's also very common for the films that you produce that you are also working not just with, let's say, directors whose stories are extremely personal and might be their family or be inside the family unit, but also then a series of films that are more hybrid in their structure, more playful. When you are beginning to get involved with the director, let's start with as a majority co-producer or a purely German production where you are thus very responsible for what happens both during the shooting and then once the film is completed and it enters like the distribution circles. What kind of questions do you ask yourself? Especially, let's say, in the case of someone like Ivana or Die mit dem Bauchtanz, when you're like talking about films where the director is directly working with their family, where these lines between the personal and the professional somehow are not just blurred, but inherently linked together?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think first of all, I think one of the main questions is always about the motivation for someone doing a film, really, kind of, and this is really a very personal question for us. So I'm really interested in getting to know as much background as I can about why is someone choosing this topic and why is she or he doing it in that way she's planning to do it. And yes, especially if there's a personal involvement, it's some kind of a tricky situation, especially if you don't know each other really well. For example, we've been working with a director, Caroline Genreit, for many years. You mentioned the first film, Die mit dem Bauchtanz, Dancing with Bellies, which was at Berlinale at the time, and it was a very personal film about her mother. And we didn't know each other at all at the time. And we had a lot of discussions at the time with the commissioning editors as well about these blurred lines that we are talking about today, and what is her role in the film, and should she be in the film herself in front of the camera or not, and is there any contact between her and her mother in the first place? Do we actually know that her mother is involved in the film, because it's a group of women it's actually a belly dancing group, and there was also the idea at some point perhaps we don't know that one of the members of the company is her mother at all. So all these kind of questions we had, and at the end of the day, I think it was a very personal, it's a beautiful film, very funny film as well. And we went on doing with her next film, which was about her father actually, and which was called Happy. And it's a film about her father who is getting married to a young Thai woman. And this Thai woman is the same age as Caroline, his daughter. And she has a lot of questions about that. And she lost touch with her father for a long time. And this occasion really was the reason why she got back in touch with her father and made a journey to Thailand with him. And they kind of came closer together again. And again, it's a very thin line, films like that. And again, we had a lot of discussions before that. How can you do that, especially if you don't want to expose someone and don't want to blame anyone, don't want to kind of how do you say? If you vorverurteilen, what is it? Prejudging, is it something like?
Yeah.
You prejudge someone, yeah.
Or you judge someone. Making. Oh, anyway, it's Saturday. I have no
Something
idea.
like that. So,
Yeah.
but the good thing was we had this film before, so we knew how the first film worked, and the second film worked out really nice as well. And but it is to get back to your question. Actually, it's really all about asking about the motivation and about the own position in the film. So where does the filmmaker see herself or himself in the film? So who do you want to be in that film? You'll be only a director, or is it actually possible to be only a director because you're so involved with the topic? So is it possible at all? And I'm also, because I'm teaching a lot at film schools, and I get a lot of projects from my students as well, with a lot of course some personal stories, and we always talk about that. Will you be in the film yourself? Will there be a commentary? Will there be a confrontation at all? Or do you want to be something like a fly on the wall person, and is that possible at all? So all this kind of, and at the end of the day, it's also an ethical question. That's why it's also important for us to know how is the relationship between the director and this family member that she or he is doing the film about. So, so I think it's just a lot of talks before, and you really need to know each other between producer and director before you can start doing that.
And more broadly, if the relationship to the main protagonist is not like one of blood ties, do you ask yourself the same questions or different questions about the motivation of the director?
Myself?
Yeah.
While I'm doing the film?
No, I mean like so say I come to you to pitch a story about, like, I don't know, kids in Uganda. Do you ask the same questions as you would if I came and said I'm making a film about my mother?
Yes, similar questions.
Mm.
It's just about, because it's always also about the access to the story. So so how is your access, and how is your, what is your motivation, what's your access, and what's your idea of the filmic style, and of how do you want to tell the story. So that's why you always have to get to know a bit more about the background. Yes.
Overall, how responsible do you feel? It's like a horrible question. How responsible do you feel for the outcome? How responsible do you feel for what's happening during the shoot? And then just start with that. How responsible do you feel for what's going on during production?
Very responsible, because very responsible, of course. So because it's also, it will be a course of film production. It will be our names behind it also, which means we really have to stand behind the final product. That's why we really want to be involved as much as we can. Obviously not in the filming itself, but later in kind of watching materials, discussing it with the directors. Right at the moment, we are editing a very delicate story, really. It's a refugee story, a family story, with a lot of delicate family secrets. And we're kind of in constant discussions with the directors. What can we show and what can't we show? Because it's due to the respect, obviously, to the protagonists, and at some point also to protect them in several ways. And sometimes, strange enough, to protect them from themselves also. Because if they tell us things to the camera, and we think it's actually perhaps not a good idea to publish that, even though they told us and they said, okay, you can use it if you want to, but still we have a responsibility and have to ask ourselves, can we do that? And can we really expose that in the film?
And who's part of that discussion? It's you and the director and other people, or?
And the editor. And the commissioning editor, of course. In that way, and usually it's between us as producers, the directors, in this case it's 2 directors, our editor and our commissioning editor as well, because they are also very much aware of this delicate situation, and we are in kind of we have a very open dialogue with the commissioning editor about that as well.
And I'm going to come back to that. I have more questions about this. But Peter, I would like to come to you if you don't mind, because you have made also a film with, I am supposing, I don't know the background entirely, but SKOKAN also uses non-professional actors. Am I correct? You just need to turn your microphone on for us so we can hear you. Oh, we still can't hear you. So yeah, now let's.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I made 4 films with non-actors, so.
And how do you feel? How responsible do you feel for portraying their world accurately, as well as communicating the core ideas or the essence of your script?
Listen, this discussion about ethics and moral does not really convince me, because I think that, of course, it is important, but everybody will agree that we have to be moral, so where is the discussion? So I think that only one thing, important thing, is that every film director has his own deontology and his own ethics, and I'm not really interested in the ethics of other people, because I have just to deal with my own. Because for me, the most important is that I choose people, I bring them to the film, and I want to work with them in order to make the most truthful and authentic film. So I listen to them, and it gives a friendship. It gives a very, very important relationship with them, and especially with gypsies, or with Roma people. I wanted to speak about the stories we can't see, we can't hear normally in medias, and to bring them to the medias, and to give a voice to the people who don't have any voice ordinarily. So they are happy to do those films with me, and I think that I saw also because I started like 20 years ago, so now I can see that the main problem is what they will become after the shooting, But I understood that I can't be responsible of a people after the film. It is impossible. But I know that if they made those films, they left some kind of dignity sometimes they didn't have before, and it was important also for the self-construction of those persons. And I know that it could serve for them. And there were moments they could fail, they could die or kill themselves. But the fact that they were, as they told one day to me, they were bigger than buildings on the screen. And they could participate, and they could experience themselves. It was very important.
Oh no! Are you guys also having a technical difficulty? Oh, that's annoying. I might actually. Maybe my dear Go-East moderator could mute Peter's microphone, and then hopefully he'll come back to us. But Ivana, do you agree as a director? Do you think that it's your ethical code and nobody else's?
Well, I mean, Peter said a lot of things, just not necessarily, I cannot concentrate only on this thing that he said because he didn't develop it. But I think that we can learn from other people. So I don't know, for me, it's quite important to talk with other people that worked on similar sets, on similar stories. So I understand how they went through saying particular stories. So for me, it's kind of important to hear what other people have to say about it. I don't know. I even enrolled on faculty, and I wanted to make a film about photographer. That is kind of like on limits of how he approaching his subjects, like his protagonists and everything. So, but it was so hard to talk about it, even with professors and everything. So I kind of dropped it, and I was like, man, this is big problems with this theme. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know what to say. It's very hard topic, but
Yes, Peter, come back to us. You're moving.
No? Yes. Are you there? Yeah. I didn't say it by arrogance to say that I'm not interested in the moral of other people. But for example, I have a colleague in Prague, and he make films with very tough subjects like pedophilia or stuff like that. And it comes to him to work even with the police, because if he found some people, for example, they made a film, and through the internet they fall to these pedophiles, and they are really tough, and so they work also with the police in order to give them to the police. For example, I don't judge it because my opinion was that a filmmaker should never work with police, because if we start to work with the police, who will have a confidence, with us, with filmmakers. But then if you turn around the subject, and a lot of people tell you, yes, but they made an incredible job, and thanks to this film, we discovered, all these terrible people, and now the public and even parents are aware about the criminality of a website, and so I don't involve no more my judgment in it. But I know only that I would never make a film like that it is not my cup of tea. And for me, this is finished, because I have just to continue my work, my own work. So I have to construct my house, my own deontology, my feelings with the people. And I think that all moral or ethics with the non-actors comes only from my respectful, or my friendship for them, and for my volunteer to, thanks to them and through to them, to speak about the life they have. It is not that I will hire somebody in order to tell him, you will make this and this. Those people, those non-actors are very important. Without them, I can't do the same story. So it's a very deep collaboration. It's a very deep human experience. And only one problem is that what will they become after the shooting? But this is something which is a big question. But one single film director is weak. I couldn't take at my home all these people from the public assessment centers and correctional houses and from prisons and from the street. So I know that there is still some kind of sadness which remains, because I work with a lot of people, and their life didn't finish well all the time. But also I could help a lot of people, because the guy from SKOKAN, we took him from the prison. I saved him, I don't know, maybe more than 1 year in prison. And thanks to the film, he found a new family, his wife, and now since 5 years he's okay and he's working, and he didn't return to the prison. And before he was kind of multi-recidivist. And the other guy, I found him in some Roma ghetto, and now he's the most very popular in Czech Republic, and he's doing films and TV series, and he's very kind of really popular. So the film can also help to those people to change their lives. But that's all for me.
Have you ever had in the framework of a shoot one of your actors say, I'm not doing this, I don't want to do this? Do you listen? Do you feel that there's a collaboration, or are you firmly the director and you say do this and then they say okay?
No, because if I hired somebody to be a good protagonist, he don't want to do something, usually he is right.
Yeah.
Yes, there are always some issues with the nudity, because especially in those communities, nobody want to show himself naked, and sometimes it's a discussion about it, because you say, no, now it's the 21st century and we have to also to show some, you know, some intimate scenes. So this is an issue, you know, but it was never too much difficult.
It's the 21st century. We have to show some flesh. Sad days. But Sarah, I want to ask you, because this brings us also to the point where the point of departure, the shoot is over, you submit your films to the festivals, the festival watches the film. Contrary to popular belief, we do watch all the submissions, often by more than one person, and then you have discussions. How much do ethical questions play a role in programming and in curating in the various film festivals that you've worked for over the years? Because also introduce yourself, because perhaps the audience doesn't know you. Tell us who you are and tell us about your
background. I'm Sarah Dawson. I'm a programmer at IDFA, at the International Documentary Film Festival of Amsterdam. I have also worked in Sheffield Docfest, but I spent most of my early career working in South Africa at the Durban International Film Festival, where I was a programmer as well. So I do have quite an interesting perspective on being, you know, I programmed on both sides of the line of the global north-south divide, you know, so that there's something quite interesting in that. I think that certainly challenged me in my work, is kind of negotiating how, in fact, there really are different ethics at play around the world. Yeah, I mean, depending on what kind of vantage point you have, certain sensitivities are greater than others, and you know, and I certainly find it quite interesting to have to confront that. And what that brings me to as a programmer is really to understand that there, in a sort of similar vein to what Peter is saying, is that there isn't really an ethical code that we could print on paper and give to people and say, do this, because the vast number of contexts in which films are being made and shown and distributed and is really significant. So then first of all, I must say that makes it no less central to the work that I do. So for me, ethics is probably, you know, I think programming, especially programming for documentary, you're working between questions of ethics and questions of aesthetics, you know? So I think, excuse me, I'm just going to close my door because there's some children screaming outside. Just hold on. So certainly what that brings me to is kind of really starting to understand that what's important in this kind of work is cultivating a constant practice of ethics. So it's not really a question of what's right and wrong. It's about trying to get to a point where you really understand inside yourself what is the purpose of what you're doing, and for me, what we're doing is showing people films, which has a different kind of set of responsibilities attached to it, to making films. And I think the main difference is that we're really having to assess the ethical value of what you as filmmakers are doing. So sort of puts us in a kind of adjudicating role in a certain kind of a way, at least when it comes to deciding whether or not a film is okay or not. But I think the question I like to ask myself when I'm sort of straddling that line is, there are two kind of questions I ask myself. The first is the obvious question that people think programmers are always doing, which is a film good? And yes, that is a big part of what we're doing. Like, we are asking the question, is a film good? Is it well executed? Does it entertain? Is it interesting? Will people buy tickets for it, etc., etc.? But for me, a sort of more important question, I think, is constantly asking myself, what good is the film? You know, it's like, what does this do? What is the purpose of this being in the world? You know, why do we need this? You know? And there are numerous ways that can be. Not every film necessarily has to be an activist film doing good in those sort of very explicit and obvious ways. It can also just be, it brings people together, it forms community, it entertains, it relieves, it helps us to see ourselves, it helps us to reflect on where we are. There's myriad ways in which something can be a good in the world, you know. And so for me, that's really a first thing I'm always asking myself when it comes to thinking about whether a film is ethical or not. But of course, we can't see what's happened off screen, you know, so we can only make a judgment based on what we know about the film, what we know about the filmmaker, what we know about the circumstance, what we know about you know, yeah, what you can see, and sometimes you can't always see when things have not been great. So, but I think certainly when it comes to documentary, I think one of the really important things that I like to think about is that, you know, your relationship with your subjects as a documentary filmmaker, it's not just like part of the film or an aspect of the film. It literally is the film, you know, because who you are and how you go about filming your subjects and the relationship that you have with those people is fundamentally going to inform the kind of film that you can create. So for me, you can sense it, you know, and it's woven into it. And I think, so yeah, I mean, really when it comes to making decisions, for me, there is a lot of sort of intuition and evaluating that you have to do all the time. But there are these kinds of relatively clear, if you're cultivating, like I say, cultivating a practice of compassion and empathy and good ethics and sort of a sense of what is the purpose of filmmaking, I think you usually make the right decision. And so, yeah, just in terms of the kind of what it means to be programming and to take ethics into consideration. And yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of generally the framework that I like to kind of think about things in. Yeah.
Do you think that there are certain, because I also think one of the roles of film festivals is to play in a different ethical framework or in a different ethical playground than, say, broadcast television or newspapers or in a commercial setting. Even like we have different rules also about different qualitative rules about what is good and what is bad. And often one of the roles of film festivals is to be provocative in some senses, to provoke discussion outside that can't take place either in a public broadcasting setting or can't take place in a newspaper or in an educational screening setting, something or inside a multiplex cinema or something. And so that means you also have like a broader scope of like good and bad. And also one of the criteria I think that's also important for film festivals is that you're not necessarily looking for a perfectly executed film per se. So of course, as you said, like the aesthetics and the mechanics of filmmaking is so important, but what sometimes we're also looking for is the beginning of artistic journeys, especially in like first appearance competitions, where people are also learning for themselves. I mean, even I think if you've made 1 million films, you're still in the process of learning. Each shoot is different. Each film is idiosyncratic in that way. But are there certain things that ring alarm bells for you in terms of ethics? And when do you draw a line of saying like, my ethics have been overstepped and this isn't something that is conversational and will engage and spark conversation and dialogue that is new, that will shape discourse in the world, versus this is unethical and we don't have the right to show this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, first of all, a selection in a film festival is an endorsement in a way, for a start. You know, I think in some way, you know, I don't think necessarily every film that you're screening you're endorsing, but you're certainly putting it on the table for conversation. So you need to be confident that that conversation is going to be a constructive one. You know, I think that's really a you know, and it's this fine line between like no platforming and programming, you know, where on the one hand we're not excluding things that are, you know, we're curating a selection of films that we don't, you know, that we hope are going to contribute to constructive conversation. You know, I think that's a sort of one of the very important, you know, so we could show, for example, a Leni Riefenstahl film or something, and it's not just because we admire the aesthetics of it, it's because maybe we want to reflect on, you know, how, you know, Nazi propaganda might have sort of resonance in how we construct media today, or, you know, creating some kind of links that foster a sort of constructive conversation, like I say. And I think in terms of the lines, like as you mentioned, in terms of like what lines would you not cross, I think it's really important when you're talking about ethics in filmmaking to acknowledge that what we're actually talking about is power in filmmaking. So, and there's numerous lines of power, you know, and you know, whether it be political power over various people, but it could even just be power within a household. You could be filming a family with an abusive patriarch, you know, and I think this is my personal ethics when it comes to programming, is that it's absolutely the responsibility of people who are going to show films and make films, that we side with the vulnerable. That's a kind of red line for me. If I have a feeling that a film is being made in a way that it doesn't necessarily have to be fighting the cause, it doesn't not every film has to be like, beating people over the head with really strong activist, goals, but it's certainly about, fostering compassion for vulnerable people, attacking power where power is exerting itself in exploitative ways, honoring trust. I think that's a really, really important thing. I think that's just basic human respect. And I think certainly when it comes to the kinds of films that I would like to see being part of the conversation, and that are sort of part of the way we are going to archive, discuss everything that film does, which is to document for posterity, as well as reflect on the future, as well as bring people together in the present. Those things, the way that we do that should also be related to the way that we want to be in the world as human beings. So if a film is approaching its subjects in a way that's just even if that subject is it's very it's difficult because there's so many multiple different situations. There's no hard lines, but certainly I think if you put together these kinds of principles, which is to always be making sure that a film is doing some form of good, to make sure that it's honoring trust and being respectful, and to make sure that it's on the side of vulnerable people and not on the side of the oppressors, those are really simple, clear kinds of lines to me. And then of course there's a lot of gray area, and you have these trolley problems. Do you show something? Do you show a victim of some in a very compromised situation in their victimhood in order to make a comment on how power is exerting itself, because you're still kind of exploiting the image of and there's no answer to these questions. It's kind of constantly, this is why I say it's really about making sure that one is constantly cultivating a practice of being ethical and asking oneself the question all the time is, do the ends justify the means? And I think these are really important things. And I think it's interesting. I think, in terms of resonating outwards, I think also there's another responsibility of filmmakers, which is just not only in terms of how it actually treats its subjects on set, but also what kind of practices is it creating a precedent for in our society. You know what I mean? So I know you want to talk about Tiger King eventually, but
I really don't. I don't want to talk about it at all. I just want Netflix to hire because I know them and they're my friends, and this is recorded and live streamed. But I just want to hire better commissioners who care about human decency, because they have now the power. That's why I also think one of the really admirable things that's happened in film festivals, even very old structures, old school structures tied to old school morals and old school ethics, have really diversified their programming teams over the last 5 to 10 years. And finally, even the concept of intersectionalism has reached continental Europe. And so we live in a time where this patriarchal white cis male agenda is changing, and that will only make our lives better. And so it's really a shame when new power systems reappropriate systems of oppression from the past. But that's capitalism.
It's just going to
well,
exactly, because that's exactly what I was going to sort of why I brought it up, was just what I find problematic about that and its treatment, which is different to, of course, there's all the problems with how it treats its subjects, in its, in the way in which there's obviously betrayals of trust that have happened in that production. But beyond that, what I find unethical about it is the imposing on reality of a template that kind of pre-exists. I think there's something extremely dishonest about that to me, and I think to take a story which obviously has massive complexities and to shape it into this good versus evil kind of quite inane, sensationalist kind of narrative that you can see was brought to the story in many ways by the people who wanted to see it in a certain kind of a way, because it would have a certain kind of it would plug into pre-existing narratives that people feel like they can identify with. And I think, to me, when it comes to documentary, that's problematic. You know what I mean? I think that the purpose of documentary is to reveal, not to impose.
Yeah. No, I mean, I couldn't agree more with you. And so I have a question from the audience, but before I ask it, I want to ask Eric one question while we're still on the topic of documentary cinema. I mean, how much responsibility do you feel, not just towards the protagonists once a film shoot is completed, and once the film is in a distribution cycle being watched by audiences, in the best case all over the world with as many eyeballs as possible, but what responsibility do you also feel to an audience, as Sarah said, about revealing rather than imposing so-called truth or authenticity, or how much does it inform also your work?
You mean responsibility for the audience who is receiving the film?
Yeah, to presenting something that is, because I mean, when was it, last year or the year before, you produced also Searching Eva, which is for me a hybrid film somewhere between fiction and non-fiction, and so there you are, or the filmmaking somehow is imposing, let's say, a truth through a revelation. I don't know if I have the right language for it, but how much responsibility do you feel to show the audience something that is authentic, and how responsible do you feel then for the protagonists whose truth is then revealed in this way? Or don't you?
With Searching Eva is a good example, actually, because obviously that was a film where we really, before it premiered at Berlinale last year, we really didn't know at all how an audience would react to it, because there's also a kind of provocative part in it. We really had kind of people really didn't like the film at all and didn't like the portrayed person in it, and although the reactions, most of them were very, very, very positive, but we also had these other people who really felt in a way insulted also. And but in the first place, I didn't really feel that the film is very provocative at all. I just had the feeling it's a very honest film. It's a very honest perspective of a very honest and open protagonist, and the film is like a puzzle. It's like a canvas, and you can kind of use it and kind of think about whatever you want. It's just like an open book, really, and that's what I really like about the film. And I think it's just a highly very artistic film, which I also like from a creative part. But that was something also, obviously, in the editing room, always about what the same thing as I mentioned before. What can you show? What would people think about it? Is there in any way that we need to protect our protagonists in front of an audience? But then with Eva, for example, she was a protagonist. She isn't afraid of anyone in the world, really, of anything, and that was really kind of great. So she said, you can do whatever, and I don't even want to see the film before its premiere. So just kind of go out and do it. Do whatever you think. Do whatever you like. And she watched it for the very first time in the audience at the festival.
And what about then on the flip side, with what was the My Marie, A Woman Captured? What was that that must also be a different situation to Searching Eva, in terms of how you've what in the process of communicating, let's say, a human rights issue to an audience, although I mean Searching Eva I could also argue it's a human rights issue if you like, but how do you have the same conversation, or is it a different conversation, do you feel, when you're dealing with those two kind of different subject matters?
It's different. It's always also different in the communication towards an audience and towards the public. So when we released A Woman Captured, we really kind of released it as you said, as a human rights film. And we really wanted to raise a topic which is completely ignored by so many people, and no one knows how big this topic is worldwide, and also in our rich country of Germany. So for us, it was very important to bring this like a campaign. We really did a huge campaign with Amnesty International and Terre des Femmes and all these kind of partners to bring this film to life and to raise a discussion. So this really was something like, that was also why we joined the film at a pretty late stage, because so we saw already a lot of material, and we thought, okay, this is something the world really has to know. There was also a very political motivation. And with Searching Eva, it's in a way different because it's even more on a personal level. And I think it speaks to you on a very kind of personal level, because it talks about identity, and you really have to make up your mind yourself and really have to think about what you want to see in that film, which is kind of more kind of, let's say, more, it addresses the audience more openly, let's say like that. So that's what I meant with using the world of a canvas, you know, kind of do whatever, paint whatever you want. And with A Woman Captured, it was definitely for us in Germany, for the German release, definitely a campaigning film, and that's what we loved about it. And it's actually, again, a very brave film, like Searching Eva, in my eyes also is a very brave film to do. But A Woman Captured was something where we said, okay, this is something the world needs to know. So this is different in the way we approached the audience and the public with the two films.
Okay, great. I have a question from the audience, which has been sitting patiently here for 15 minutes. So I will ask it. It is for the two filmmakers on the panel, Ivana and Petr. But actually, Eric, if you have an opinion to this question, I think you could probably answer it too. So it's from Andrea, who I assume is Andrea Kuhn from the International Human Rights Film Festival in Nuremberg. And it says, this is a question to all of the filmmakers in the round. How do you deal with the imbalance in terms of creative control between director and protagonists, which protagonists might not be fully aware of, and with the possible imbalance in understanding of what will happen with the finished film, possible difference between director's perspective and perceived self-representation in front of the camera in the scope of it all? For example, huge screenings, actual international exposure, criticism, etc. Trying to clarify, this is about consent. How can one make sure that the people in front of the camera know what they are consenting to if they have no experience in filmmaking? ? Yes, and go for it, Petr. Take it away.
I don't know. For me, I don't want to speak to other people. Certainly, other directors exist and they work like that. I don't like, because I know that if the guy I have to construct the film with me don't know what is happening on, how can I make a good film? So I think that I never used to live any imbalance between me and those people, because we of course that the director have to is the master on the set, and you know, when he says something that people has to do it, normally they should do it, because you have to. It is not a casino, you know, it is a set, so there must be some leading person. But in terms of organization, but then I know only, you know, the deep collaboration with the people, and I don't want to be somebody who says you will do that and that. I have an exchange. I want to amuse them. I want to that they amuse me, and usually, especially with the children, I don't want to have any authority on them, and usually it comes to me to tell them, just do something and we will see later in the editing room, because I want to be surprised by them. So I never use, I think that maybe there could be some small moment of somebody cannot understand exactly what is going now, because, you know, it goes fast. And so, but usually I think that if we don't have a deep relationship, a really partnership with the non-actor, we can't do the film. Mm-hmm. So for me, I don't think that I never used somebody, you know, just on some disgusting way. I am not aware about it, and I think that if it is not a collaboration, this vision that there is somebody who is, you know, like dictating something to other people, I didn't see it on my set like that. because it doesn't work. You can be very demanding with technicians, for example. It happened to me that the Steadicam guy cried because he couldn't make it no more. But it doesn't serve with your relationship with the actor and non-actor. It doesn't serve. They are souls, and you have to bring their souls on the screen.
Mm.
So for me, I think that this processing of filmmaking is deeply democratic.
Eric, would you
But
like to?
I think it's very, very, very important question, and I wouldn't say there's an imbalance regarding the exposure of the film later. That's how I understood the film, the question. But I think we have different starting points. We as filmmakers, we come from a different point, and when we are meeting our protagonists, and at the moment where we're meeting, most of them actually don't know what will happen with the film, I think, and I don't think that they have a really kind of clear picture of how this film will be exposed and kind of published, and what does it mean to be in a cinema documentary, and what does it mean to have a broadcaster on board, and how many people would see it, and all these kind of things. So that's why I agree that what we really need to do is to kind of partner with the protagonists in a way, and kind of don't leave them behind in that. And I think there needs to be a kind of constant discussion about that. And obviously, as producers, we are facing these questions at the moment, at the very latest, when we have to need a signature under something like an agreement with the protagonists to be able to release the film in any way. And then this is the moment which is always very, very crucial in every production, that we really need to kind of talk in absolute detail and very openly with the protagonists about what will happen with this film, where it will be exposed. It's very important, because also these agreements and the wording, this kind of law wording thing, it's very difficult sometimes for them to understand. And I think it's very, very, very important to be as open as possible, and trying not to lose them on the way, really, because I think this is a very crucial thing. So to that we had kind of discussing this on the same level.
Ivana, what about you? Because in your case, you're not just the director, you're also the actor. What kind of mechanisms do you put in place also for yourself, for your own, I hate the word self-care, but in this case, quite literally self-care?
I think that for me it's very important to find myself a good team that I can always talk to. That it's not only me over there, because sometimes it can be very overwhelming. Not necessarily in this film, but in a previous film that I worked in the ghetto. And I think that the most important thing is that I found people that I can collaborate to. Also, my producer was very big help, and I found a social agent, a girl that worked very much in the neighborhood. So I always talked with her, and I also had a help of one of your directors, Eric, Radu Čorničuk. We worked together. I mean, he helped me actually find people who can guide me through the neighborhood. That was big help, and make me aware of problems, and make me aware of what wrong things I might do without wanting to make wrong things. You know what I mean? So it was very important. There was this anti-AIDS organization. I would talk with them for 6 months before even getting into the casting, even getting into the shooting. So finding all these people that can make me aware of any possibility of anything that I might do wrong, just to be clear with everybody, with protagonists, with the team, with everybody. I think that's a good starting point. Of course, you can never know that you might make a mistake, because I don't know, you haven't been in the situation. Some situations are new for you, so you might make some mistakes that you don't want to make. But I think that it's very good to be very well prepared, or at least talk with as many people as you can, and similar situations that they've been through. So I found myself people that I can talk to. Even in Ivana the Terrible film, I found my best friends, and I found a girl. She's one of my biggest friends, but she made a film with her family that they were playing themselves 10 years ago. She made a film in the belly's whale, in the belly of the whale. Yeah, she made a film already with her family, and so she told me, and with her friends and with other people involved in the reality that she was trying to reproduce. So I kind of like to talk and ask people what they've been through. So I don't know. It was a very big help that I found myself a team that I can always be surrounded with. I don't know. For me, that's very helpful. So.
And does your producer then does she reprimand you for going too far? Does she ever say that that's enough, or how are the conversations that you are having? What's the framework of the conversation, let's say?
No, but I mean, it's usually because there were fiction films. Even though I was working with non-professional actors, but there is always like, it was a very big team. So the only thing that it's enough, it would be the number of takes that I wanted to shoot. And if I would go too far with like trying to obtain something that I am sure that I can get, but sometimes I might go, like a little bit trying too much. So maybe they would not say it's enough. They would take me on the side and say, look, are you sure that you want to, keep on going? And of course, there will always be some kind of communication, but I think that they're also trying to be understanding with the directors as well.
Audience, you are being very quiet. We have 10 more minutes left, so you should throw some questions into the chat function if you like. I have it open and I'm waiting for you.
I was just going to comment. I just wanted to quickly comment on a thing. I think that was Eric said. It was just talking about release forms, and I was just thinking then about the conversation about DAO earlier on in this conversation, and just think it's just an important point to make, to note the difference between something being like lawful and something still being actually good, just filmmaking practice. Because I think there's a lot of times when a filmmaker can produce a release form saying, look, someone signed it. That doesn't mean they really necessarily get, it's a lot more, we tend to turn towards these kind of black and white things of like, we've got it on paper, but coming back to the question from Andrea, it's just, sometimes people don't necessarily know what they're getting themselves into. And, I just think sometimes it's important to be aware of how sometimes those legal practices within the filmmaking industry can still be exploited and exploitative. Yeah.
No, I totally agree. So this is you're totally right. So we just, we need these release forms. Otherwise, we can't kind of close contracts with broadcasters and so on. But you're completely right. This is always about kind of explaining everything really in detail. And, at the end of the day, if someone wants to step out of the film, he or she steps out of the film. Never mind if I have a contract, a release form, whatever, I can't and I won't ever force anyone to stay in our documentary. Never. If someone says, I just changed my mind, and obviously we will have very tough discussions about that. But if it's like that, then people can leave. What could I do? And so we couldn't do it. And it never happened. Never. And I hope it will never happen. But at the end of the day, it's just a piece of paper. At the end of the day, you can't force people.
But that's a personal ethics, Eric. And I wonder, like, I also am not for kind of creating some kind of police force to deal with this stuff. I also don't want any kind of like McCarthyism, gross draconian censorship. But sometimes I do wish not everybody is as fair as you are, let's say. But actually, this is a moment also. So I have 3 questions. I'm going to start with one for Ivana first. It's from Marina. She asks, wasn't it overwhelming to be both the main protagonist and a director in the film? ?
It was. I mean, it was very funny to find out that I'm being very much of an annoying character. But my friends that I called to direct me, they made sure to be not to be so overwhelming. So I found myself a good help on that. I had people that directed me while I was directing other characters in the film. So as I said before, you need help. You cannot do everything on your own. So I was definitely aware that I'm gonna be doing producing, directing, acting, and all kinds of weird stuff on this film. But I had a lot of help, and I think from that point of view, was not that overwhelming. Or maybe I don't want to even remember it anymore. I don't know.
Is this the way you plan to keep working?
The next film is also an autobiographical book, but I'm not sure that I will be working. Like on the previous, the writer of the book is playing himself. On this one, I'm playing myself, and on the next one, I'm not yet sure. I'm trying to figure out.
Okay, so the next one is maybe, I mean, everybody can take it. But maybe Eric, you want to start with it. It says, I'm interested about payments for documentary protagonists, how to fairly remunerate campaign money, help, etc. Any concrete examples? And it's from Dasha Ramanova.
Very difficult question, because obviously we're having this every time again, and basically regarding also the budgets of documentary that you have, it could never be something like a salary or anything for protagonists, so something like to pay like an actor, and I think this wouldn't also be correct, so I wouldn't quite like to do it, because obviously we want to make a film in consent with the protagonists, so we don't want to do them the film because they get paid for it. So I think this would be a completely wrong approach. But it's also a budget thing. Usually you just don't have a budget to pay a complete salary, but at the same time it really also depends on the life situations of the people. We also have protagonists who would say at the beginning that they don't want anything, they don't want money. That's really, I had that already. And we have also protagonists who ask for money, and then we also pay money, of course. We do, but not, yeah, it's not, as I said, it's not like a salary, and I don't really have actually figures because it differs so much because of the budget and of the situation and the personal life situation of the protagonist also. But it's always something we discuss openly, and if the protagonists ask for them for any kind of money, we offer it always. So, but we kind of discuss it in a kind of very open way. So, and it needs to stay obviously in the budget, and needs to kind of be in balance with the salaries of everyone else. So
then I have one last question on that topic. So you're a German producer. You say you can be a majority co-producer, you can be a minority co-producer when you're dealing with international teams and international productions. And it's terrible to ask this question 5 minutes before the end of the session. But in terms of I mean, one of the most important elements of ethics is also about fairness, you know, like honesty and fairness, creating fair splits of certain things. And I'm not even necessarily talking about rights now, but how do you ensure that your co-productions can be ethical? And especially, let's say in the case of My Marish, where a woman captured, where it's where you're talking about a Hungarian team, you're talking about a low budget. I'm sorry that this is also being recorded. Like usually in a film festival, these things just like disappear into like the universe. But how do you, from you are in Western Europe, you're in one of the kind of superpower countries of the audiovisual industry. You're co-producing with a Hungarian production company, a Hungarian director who's been working on the material for all of these years. How do you keep it fair and ethical?
It's interesting because I exactly talked about that in March already at the eStock platform in Prague. We had this question because we are producing a lot with Eastern Europe and at the moment with Salome Yashi from Georgia as well. And we did Akasa with Radu, where we entered pretty late at a pretty late stage, like at A Woman Captured as well. And of course, we can't do it in proportions that you would usually do it. So the kind of, because usually I'm always able to bring in more money just because I have more possibilities. But obviously, this must definitely not raise my percentages in the film. Which means we really kind of sit down together and discuss what is a reasonable kind of percentage. Sometimes we only take really only Germany. We say we take our territory, that's it, you know, and the rest of the world is to the other producers. Sometimes we take a percentage of the world rights, but it's definitely something that has to be discussed every time again, and it needs to be fair. And we are completely aware that if we enter a project at a later stage with an amount of money, you can't compare it with the money coming in from the other countries. So this is something we always do very openly and hopefully always fair.
And I have one last question for you, because you are also a nice and ethical person because we know each other for a long time and we've worked together in different ways. But not everybody is a nice and ethical person, and sometimes it's not just because they're not a nice person; they just haven't thought about the big picture, and sometimes they haven't had like the experience of what exploitation means until often. Like, people don't go in with exploitative hopes and dreams. It just, you come to a situation that is unfair. Do you have advice, because this is in the framework of this talent lab, for Central and East European producers and directors about defending their rights, their right to fairness?
Yes, my advice would really be aware of what you have in your hands, because you have the story, you have the people, you have the film basically, and on the other side of the table there may be someone who has more money than you have, yeah. But this person can't do anything without your film, without your connections, without your access, and without your work, and that you've done in all the years before, perhaps also in developing the film and filming it and editing and everything. So I think you really need to be aware of what you have, and this is much, much more than any money that is sitting on the other side of the table.
Ivana, I'm desperate also to get your thoughts about this. You're like a young woman, you're like a director, you're working in Romania of like Serbian origin. How do you feel like you hold yourself in the face of like larger international markets who also are interested in your work and in your rights and in your fees, for example? Or is it more a conversation that you leave for your producer?
I would like to leave all these things to for my producer. I would like to travel as less as I could. I hate traveling. I would like to sit and write and think and work with people, but of course it's not possible. There is always it's always very, very important that with the producer, the director comes with the producer. So I try to I try to go through that, but for me it's definitely much more, I don't know, it's very hard. Sometimes it's very hard to travel on these markets and to understand, but of course sometimes maybe you need to understand how the market works and to listen to other people as well. But it's before it was even harder, to be honest, to go to this market. So I would like my producer to go on all these things without me, but sometimes it's definitely not possible.
So you would never self-direct, self-star, and self-produce?
Yeah, exactly. Like I did. No, I don't know. I definitely not again. Let's put it that way. Definitely not again.
It's like, okay, that's good. So do everything once and then get out of the circle of self-exploitation also. Peter, maybe to give you sort of the last word, what do you think? Like, so we find ourselves also in this kind of coronavirus lockdown situation. I also was looking at kind of not an ethical code, but some examples suggested by North American funding agencies about how to shoot in this period. And the first question is, should you be shooting at all? Which I think is actually the best one. Like, what exactly will this shooting in this period give to the world and to yourself and to your business situation, to your economic situation, etc., etc. But there is just one last question. It's addressed to Sarah, but I think, like, Peter, you should start, which says that about the ends justifying the means. And in this case, they ask about, like, Artur Khrzhanovskiy. I'm sorry, I don't speak any Slavic languages, which is very embarrassing, except like the language of drunken arguments. But that also might be Irish. The film's quality, and in what sense? But I would ask you, as a filmmaker, like, how much do the means justify the results? How far are you willing also to push yourself in your relationship with protagonists in order to get, or with your non-professional actors in order to get the results that you would like?
It's for me?
Yeah, for you.
Again, what's the question, please?
How willing are you to stretch your ethical code with your personal ethical code when working with non-professional actors in order to get the results that you would like?
I don't understand the question, because I think that if it is a non-actor or actor, it's a collaboration. So where the ethics is involved, I don't know. The ethics for me is just the relationship you have with your non-actor, actor, or other people. So I don't know how to obtain something really good if you will cheat with your actor or your non-actor. So maybe give me some example, but precise example. But I don't really know what you ask.
I think that's a very good answer, though. I think that actually answers the question quite clearly. It means that you're.
For example, if I will let somebody, in some scene to frozen him because I need to do a snow scene, of course, I think that in some conditions we can be really hard with other people and with ourselves when we have to do something, to prove something, yeah.
But I think really
But I would say that I believe that in a real collaboration, and it is not, if it is actor or non-actor, it's different modalities, but it's all the same all the time. The same to understand that we have a goal together, and we try to understand how to go to this goal, and you try to give the best condition to the non-actor or to the actor in order to express himself, to show what he has in his mind and in his soul. So then this is the thing,
All right, Sarah, you have like 2 sentences, and then we're totally out of time, which is, I guess, about if you know exploitation has occurred, but the film is really good, would you program it anyway?
Usually films where exploitation has happened aren't very good. Do you know what I mean? I mean, it just depends on how one defines what is good. You know what I mean? And for me, I think when it comes to coming back to the because the film is meant to be communicating some like human truths, and if you're being deceitful or exerting power over people, being dishonest, how can that be a good film? It can only be a lie, you know what I mean? And so unless there are some circumstances, like I was saying earlier, where things are a little bit more kind of vague and gray, and sometimes this ends justifies the means thing. What I would say about that is, I think because of a kind of way in which we conceptualize the auteur in our society now, and the way we kind of the way that's tied in with certain kind of hierarchical structures that are related to the era of civilization that we're in, I would say that often, very, very often, directors overestimate the good that they're doing in the world at the expense of people who don't deserve to be treated that way for the sake of somebody's ego, and I think that's something that happens a lot. But I also think it's usually quite transparent when you see it in the end. You can tell when a film has like care in it. Yeah.
Perfect. That's it. We're out of time. So, Inka, yes, I will show the question to Sarah just to answer you. I'm super sorry. I'm really unfamiliar. Look, I'm even cutting and pasting it right now. And I can put it into the general chat. I'm sorry that we ran out of time to not address it more. more carefully. But really, thank you everybody for participating on this very sunny Saturday afternoon. I hope that the sun is out wherever you still are and you can go and catch some fresh air. Thank you so much to our esteemed panelists, also to Go East for having us. And for those of you watching at home, make sure that you watch Ivana and Peter's film. And Eric, you have a casa also, right? That you produced the program.
Those bars. Highly recommended.
Great.
Okay, thanks.
Good. All right.
Ciao. Thank you.
Thank you.
Meeting you.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Ja.